The paperwork from the bank arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after we buried my husband. I sat at the kitchen table in our house in Guelph and read the numbers twice, then a third time, as though they might rearrange themselves into something more forgiving. The survivor's benefit from Gordon's Canada pension plan would cover the hydro bill and not much else. After 38 years of marriage, I was 62 years old, and I needed to find a job. I hadn't worked since our daughter was born. Gordon had been the one with the steady income, first at the plant, then as a shop foreman, and I had kept the house, raised Claire, volunteered at the school library long after she'd graduated and moved to Vancouver. We had savings, but the last 2 years of his illness had eaten through most of them quietly, the way water wears through stone. The long-term care placement alone had cost more than either of us had planned for. OHIP covered the basics. It didn't cover everything else. A neighbor told me about the opening at Maplewood Gardens. Not the kind of place you imagine when you're young and healthy, but I'd visited Gordon there in his final months, and I knew the staff by name. When the evening shift coordinator position came open in the records department, I applied. I was honest on the form about my gaps. They hired me anyway, 3 evenings a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, 4 to midnight. The first month was harder than I'd expected, not because the work was difficult, but because driving home at midnight through the dark Guelph streets, I kept thinking about Gordon, about the chair by the window in our kitchen where he used to sit and wait up for me even when I'd only gone out for groceries. That chair was empty now, and it would stay empty, and I had to keep driving past it every night. The bus route near Maplewood Gardens stopped running at 11. I found that out the hard way on my third shift, standing under the shelter in the October cold, watching the time on my phone tick past the last scheduled pickup. My daughter had installed a food delivery app on my phone the previous Christmas, one of those things you download and forget about. I opened it by accident looking for the taxi number and realized you could order more than food. There was a ride option. So I tried it. The first car that accepted was a dark blue Honda, and the name on the app said Daniel. He was already idling at the staff entrance when I pushed through the doors, hands buried in my coat pockets, breath making small clouds in the cold. A man in his mid-50s, maybe older, with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He had the careful, deliberate way of moving that I associated with people who had spent years doing physical work. "Rough night?" he asked as I climbed in. "They're all rough nights right now," I said before I could stop myself. He didn't say anything to that, just nodded, and pulled out onto Stone Road. Something about the way he didn't push for more made me relax slightly. "How long have you been driving?" I asked to fill the quiet. "About 2 years. I was at the auto parts plant on Silver Creek before it consolidated." He said it the way people say things they've had to explain too many times. Matter of fact, the edges worn smooth. This keeps the lights on. I knew about the plant closure. Gordon had known men who'd worked there. I said I was sorry and I meant it, and he glanced at me briefly in the rearview mirror. "Most people don't bother," he said. We pulled up to my house on Courtright Road 11 minutes later. I gave him a $5 cash tip through the window. He tried to wave it off. I told him I didn't argue with people who drove me safely through the dark, and he laughed, a low, surprised sound, as if he hadn't expected to. After that, something happened that I noticed, but didn't examine too closely. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, when I opened the app at 5 minutes to midnight, Daniel's blue Honda would accept within seconds. By the second week, I'd stopped questioning the coincidence. By the third, I understood it wasn't one. He was positioning himself nearby before my shift ended, making sure he'd be the one who got there first. We fell into a routine the way you fall into routines with people you see regularly and genuinely like. He'd already have my address entered. I'd slide into the back seat, and we'd talk for the 11 or 12 minutes it took to get home. At first, it was the safe things. The weather, which in November in Guelph means mostly gray and damp, the road construction on Hanlon that added 5 minutes to every route, how his night had been. Then gradually it became other things. I learned that Daniel had a son at Laurier studying engineering, a boy he'd been putting through school on plant wages and now on delivery shifts. I learned that his wife had passed 6 years ago from a cardiac event. No warning, no time to say anything. I learned that he'd been sending money to his older brother in Korea who'd had a bad year, and that he never mentioned any of this to anyone because he didn't want to seem like he was making excuses for the old car or the worn jacket. "You're carrying a lot," I told him one night in late October. He shrugged with one shoulder. "Everyone is. You just don't always see it from the outside." I thought about that for days afterward. In November, I started bringing him coffee. Not anything fancy, just the large double-double from the Tim Hortons machine in the Maplewood staff lounge. It wasn't good coffee by any reasonable standard, but it was hot, and at midnight in November in Ontario, hot was what mattered. The first time I handed it through the window, he went very still for a moment, looking at it. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," I said. "But I get one at 11:30 anyway, and you're driving for another 4 hours, and the least I can do is make sure you don't fall asleep somewhere on the 401. He took it carefully, both hands, the way you hold something you don't want to drop. "Thank you, Dorothy." No one called me Dorothy except my mother. Everyone else called me Dot. But I didn't correct him because the way he said it didn't feel formal. It felt like he was paying attention. After that, the coffee was part of it. I'd come out with 2 cups, and we'd drive through the dark residential streets, and sometimes we talked the whole way, and sometimes we said almost nothing, and both were comfortable. He told me about the strangest orders he'd delivered, the conversations he overheard, the city at night, and what it looked like from the driver's seat when everyone else had gone to bed. I told him about Gordon, about learning to sleep in the middle of the bed after 38 years of sleeping on one side, about Claire calling every Sunday from Vancouver, and how much I missed her voice during the week. "You're doing better than you think," he said one night in late November, turning onto Courtright. "How can you tell?" "Because people who aren't doing well don't notice other people," he said. "And you notice everything." I felt something tighten in my chest. The good kind of tight, the kind that means something has touched something real. December came in cold and gray, the way Decembers do in southwestern Ontario, frost on the windshields before sunrise, ice warnings on the radio. I started bringing him hot chocolate instead of coffee some nights, and once I taped a candy cane to the cup for no reason I could explain. He laughed when he saw it, a real laugh, and said it was the kind of thing his wife used to do. I told him she sounded like a good person. "She was better than I deserved for most of our marriage," he said quietly. "I've been trying to make up the difference ever since." It was a Thursday night, December 12th, when everything changed. Daniel pulled up to the staff entrance as usual, but something was wrong before I even opened the door. He was gripping the steering wheel with both hands, and when I got in, he didn't pull away immediately. He sat there for a moment, engine running, and when he finally looked at me in the mirror, his face was tight with something I hadn't seen there before. "Dorothy," he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything." My stomach went cold. "What's happened?" "There's a man at Maplewood." He said it carefully, like he'd rehearsed the order of words. "Kevin Hartley. Do you know him?" I blinked. "Kevin from administration?" "He does the benefits coordination on the second floor. We've passed each other in the hallway a dozen times. When did you last talk to him?" "We've never really talked. Just hello in passing." "Why?" Daniel pulled out of the parking lot, but he turned right instead of left. Away from Courtright Road. "Where are we going?" "He drives for another app on his off shifts," Daniel said. "I've recognized his car 3 or 4 times this fall from the forums. 2 weeks ago, he requested a delivery pickup from a restaurant near my usual zone. I picked it up. He was drunk, not badly, but enough. He was on his phone the whole ride." I waited. At first I wasn't listening. You learn not to in this job. But then he said something that made me pay attention. He said, and these were the words exactly, "The woman in records has been pulling files. The old ones. She's too thorough. If she connects it back to the system entries, it becomes a problem." The car was very quiet. "He was talking about me," I said. Daniel nodded, watching the road. "He said your name, Dorothy. Your last name. MacKenzie. He said it to whoever was on the other end of the phone, and he said, 'She works evenings. We need to know how much she's seen.'" My mouth was dry. "There's an audit." I said it slowly. "We've had one running since October. Files flagged in the billing system. Discrepancies between what was submitted to the province and what the physical records show. My supervisor pulled me in because I know the filing system better than anyone. I've been going back through 3 years of entries." Daniel turned into the empty lot behind the Zares on Stone Road and put the car in park. He turned to face me properly. "I've picked him up 4 more times since then," he said. "I started keeping track the second time." He pulled out his phone and showed me a notes file. Dates, times, fragments of conversation. Always drunk. Always on the phone. 2 nights ago, he said your shift schedule. Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays. And then he said, find out what she has at home. The heating in the car was running, but I felt cold through and through. Last night, Daniel said, his voice steady. I drove past Courtright on my way to a pickup. Your lights were off, you were on shift. And Kevin Hartley's gray Civic was parked 2 houses down from yours, lights off, engine on. He was watching my house. I believe so. Daniel's jaw was tight. And Dorothy, tonight I came that way again before I picked you up. He was parked in front of your house. I watched him get out and try your side door. I put my hand over my mouth. It was locked. He stood there for almost a minute, trying the handle, looking in the window. Then he got back in his car. That's when I drove to the lot to wait for you. Daniel reached back and held out his phone. All of it is here. Dates, times, what he said. I kept everything. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because the first time I wasn't certain, he said. I thought maybe I was reading too much into it. Drunk people say all kinds of things. But then the second time and the third, and when I saw the car outside your house, he paused. I don't make mistakes about this anymore, Dorothy. I can't afford to. There was something in the way he said it. I looked at him. He was quiet for a moment. My son, he said finally, before he started at Laurier. When he was 17, there was a man in our neighborhood who took an interest in him, seemed friendly. We all thought he was being kind, mentoring a boy without a mother. I told my son he was lucky to have a mentor. I waited. One night I drove past the park near our house, and I saw my son's bicycle chained to the fence, just sitting there. At 11 at night, I almost kept driving. I almost told myself it was nothing. He stopped. His hands were very still on the wheel. I didn't keep driving, he said. And when I walked into that park, I found my son. He was not okay. The man had been building toward that for months, and I had not been paying attention. I had chosen, every single time, to explain it away because paying attention meant having to do something, and doing something was harder. The silence in the car was absolute. My son is fine, Daniel said. He's at Laurier. He's studying engineering and he calls me on Sundays. But I know what it cost him, and I know what it cost us. So now I pay attention. I don't look away from things because looking away is easier. I took the phone from his hands. We need to go to the police, he said. Not tomorrow. Tonight. It took me a moment to find my voice. You're right. The Guelph police service on Wyndham Street was quieter than I expected at 1:45 in the morning. A young constable took our initial statement at the front desk, and after about 10 minutes an older detective came in from a back office, a tall woman with reading glasses on a chain, and the particular stillness of someone who has learned to listen before speaking. She looked at Daniel's notes. She looked at me. She asked Daniel twice, in different ways, whether he was certain about the dates and what he'd heard, and both times he was calm and precise. The same words, no elaboration, no exaggeration. You have recordings, she said. It was not quite a question. Daniel nodded. I started keeping audio on the rides after the second time. His phone connects automatically when he's in the car, and I accept the request. The app terms allow it. I have 4 rides recorded. The detective's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. She left the room briefly, returned with a laptop. We sat in that small interview room and listened to Kevin Hartley's voice, slightly blurred at the edges with drink, talking about Maplewood, about files, about me, about the schedule. Mrs. MacKenzie, the detective said when the last recording ended, tell me about the audit. I told her everything, the flagged entries going back to 2021. The pattern my supervisor and I had noticed, claims submitted to the provincial long-term care funding stream for services that had no corresponding physical documentation. Small amounts per resident, $50 here, $70 there, never large enough to trigger an automatic review, but across 83 residents over 3 years. It added up. Kevin Hartley's role, I said slowly, is benefits coordination. He's the one who interfaces between the residents' family finances and the provincial billing system. He has access to the SINs of every resident in the building. He has access to the family contact accounts. He submits the monthly claims. The detective looked at the younger officer. He was nodding before she'd finished turning. "What made you start connecting it to him?" she asked. "I hadn't," I said honestly. "I didn't know it was him. I was working through the file discrepancies chronologically. I was going to have a list ready for my supervisor by end of January. I had no idea he knew I was auditing at all. But he knew your name. He knew my name and my schedule, and where I live," I said. The detective stood up and excused herself. Through the window I could see her making calls. Daniel sat beside me, hands folded on the table, quiet and steady. I realized I was shaking slightly and hadn't noticed until that moment. He reached over and put his hand over mine briefly. "You're all right," he said. "You're safe." The warrant came through before 3 a.m. Daniel and I sat in the waiting area while officers coordinated. The detective came out at 4:40 to tell us what they'd found at Kevin Hartley's apartment in the South End: a second laptop with remote access credentials for the Maplewood billing system, a spreadsheet tracking 41 resident SINs paired with secondary account information, and documentation of fraudulent claims totaling close to $160,000 filed through the provincial funding stream over 38 months. He also had printed copies of the Maplewood evening shift schedule, the detective said, looking at me steadily, "with your name circled." I sat with that for a moment. "He's been arrested," she said. "He'll face fraud charges, breach of trust, criminal harassment, and attempted break and enter. There will likely be federal charges as well, given the scale of the financial fraud. You're safe to go home, Mrs. MacKenzie. We'll be in touch about a formal statement." I didn't ask Daniel to drive me home. He was already standing, holding my coat. We drove through Guelph in the dark before sunrise, the streets entirely empty, the Christmas lights still on in a few windows even at 5 a.m. Neither of us said anything for a long time. "How did you know to keep the recordings?" I finally asked. He was quiet for a moment. "After what happened with my son, I did a lot of thinking about what it means to actually look out for someone. Not just feel concerned for them and keep it to yourself, but actually do the thing." He glanced at me in the mirror. "You were kind to me from the first night. Nobody had been kind to me in a long time. So I decided I would be the kind of person who earned that." I felt the tears before I was aware I was going to cry. I wiped them away quickly. "You saved my life," I said. He shook his head. "You saw me first. And when someone sees you, really sees you, you start seeing more carefully yourself." We pulled up to my house on Courtright. The streetlights were still on. The neighborhood was still and dark and safe. "Dorothy," he said, "I want you to have my number. My actual number. Not the app." He handed me a card, day or night. I took it. "I'll call," I said. "And Daniel, thank you for not looking away." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for making it matter." The investigation took almost 4 months. The Provincial Ministry of Long-Term Care opened a parallel inquiry into the broader fraud, which eventually uncovered that Kevin Hartley had been operating a secondary scheme, selling batches of SIN numbers to a contact in Toronto who used them for identity fraud against other elderly Canadians. The full scope reached nearly $320,000 across multiple facilities where he'd worked over the previous 5 years. The man he'd been speaking with on the phone turned out to be the Toronto contact. They were both charged. I gave a formal statement 3 times. Daniel gave his twice. His audio recordings were central to the case. Kevin Hartley pleaded guilty to fraud over $5,000, breach of trust, and criminal harassment. He received 7 years. Through all of it, Daniel kept driving me. Not through the app. He'd text at 11:30 and I'd come out and he'd be there. Same dark blue Honda, same patient steadiness. Somewhere in January, I started sitting in the front seat, and we both pretended not to notice the shift that represented. In February, he mentioned carefully and without elaboration that his son had emailed his old coach from their neighborhood. The coach had come forward as a witness during the original police investigation years ago, and the email was something my son needed to send, Daniel said. Closure, maybe. Or just proof that he hadn't let it become the biggest thing about him. How is he? Stronger than I was at his age, Daniel said. I squeezed his arm across the console. In March, he told me that his son had come home for reading week, and the two of them had gone through some boxes of his wife's things that had been sitting in the closet since she died. 6 years those boxes had sat there. They'd gone through them together. Was it hard? Yes, he said, but we should have done it 5 years ago. Some weight you can't put down until you pick it up properly. That spring, Claire came home from Vancouver for 2 weeks. I'd been telling her about Daniel in small pieces over the phone, never quite knowing how to explain what our friendship was or how it had started. On the Saturday she was home, she asked to come with me on my shift, and when Daniel pulled up, she climbed in the back and introduced herself with the particular directness that she'd always had, even as a child. She texted me that night while I was finishing an entry in the record system. "He's good people, Mum. You can tell by the way he drives." She'd always judged people by how they did small things. In May, the 4 of us had dinner, Daniel, his son Marcus, Claire, and me, at a restaurant on Wyndham that had been there since before any of us could remember. Marcus was quieter than I'd expected, thoughtful, with his father's habit of listening before speaking. He was finishing his 2nd year. He wanted to go into structural engineering, bridges specifically. "There's something satisfying," he said, "about building things that are supposed to last." His father looked at him across the table with an expression I recognized from the few photographs Gordon had ever let me take of him with Claire. The particular pride that tries not to be too visible because it doesn't want to embarrass the person it's for. At the end of the evening, walking back to the car, Marcus fell into step beside me for a moment. "He talks about you," Marcus said quietly. "He said you were the first person in a long time who made him feel like what he did mattered." I thought about a midnight parking lot in December, a man telling me to listen carefully, a cup of Tim Hortons coffee growing cold in the cup holder. "It did matter," I said. "It mattered enormously." I still work my 3 evenings a week at Maplewood Gardens. The audit findings led to a complete overhaul of the billing oversight system, and I was asked to help design the new internal review process, which has become the better part of my job now. There are 3 of us on the records verification team, and we're thorough in a way that would have made what Kevin Hartley did impossible to sustain past the first year. The new intake coordinator, a young woman named Priya, started in September. On her first week, I watched her struggle with the classification system, cross-referencing 2 different databases that don't quite speak the same language. I saw her take a breath at the end of her Tuesday shift that was just a little too careful, the kind of breath you take when you're trying not to be seen struggling. I brought her coffee on her 2nd Thursday. She looked at the cup for a moment before she took it, and then she looked at me and she said, "You have no idea how much I needed this." "I do," I told her. "I know exactly." She stayed late that night and I walked her through the cross-reference system, and by the end of the shift she had it. "You're a quick study," I told her. She shook her head and said I was a good teacher. I thought about Daniel, about the night he turned right instead of left, about what it means to pay attention to someone at the right moment, about how the choice to see someone, really see them rather than look past them, is never a small choice even when it looks like one from the outside. We don't always know, when we're doing it, that it matters. The coffee, the real question instead of the polite one, the moment when you could look away and you don't. We don't know most of the time what that decision costs us or what it saves. What I know now, sitting on the other side of the worst year of my life, is this. I was 60, 2 years old and alone, and a stranger drove me safely through the dark, and I handed him a coffee through a car window. And because of that small exchange of ordinary human decency, I am still here, still in my house on Courtright Road, still doing work that matters, with a friend who texts at 11:30 on Tuesday nights and is always already on his way. Whoever is reading this, whatever your version of the coffee looks like, give it. Not because it will be returned, not because anyone will thank you. Give it because the person across from you is carrying something you cannot see, and because sometimes the smallest gesture is the only thing standing between someone and the thing they can't survive alone. Be the person who doesn't look away. It costs you almost nothing. It might be everything.